issue for us for many years with Robbie. For some reason, holidays always seemed to bother him. As soon as we gathered around the dining room table to eat, he would begin getting agitated. He'd come out of his TV room and he'd run in here into the living room, and he would run back, and he'd run back in the living room, and he'd run back in his room, and we could tell that he was agitated and upset. And the only time we ever eat at the dining room table, the whole family with grandma and everybody here, is usually on a holiday. So we knew that he was putting eating at the dining room table together in his mind with something, but we weren't sure what. And what started to happen was every Christmas he was getting sick. And it became by 6 p.m., like clockwork, he'd start to throw up. So we knew we didn't like it, but we didn't know why. So when Robbie was 17, Robbie had his first seizure. And I wasn't home. I was at music rehearsal at church. We were rehearsing on the altar and doing sound checks and things. And the church is right at the light in the corner of town. And I saw ambulances go by the church. And I heard the sirens and I saw them. And something inside me knew. It's, that mother's intuition, or whatever you want to call it, but I knew those ambulances were going to my house. Sure enough, 10 minutes later, my daughter Patty burst through the back door, ran across the altar, ran over to me. "Mom, it's Robbie. He had a seizure. He's in the ambulance. He's on his way to the hospital." I said, "I knew it." I packed up my bag, we got in the car, and we took off to the hospital. And what had happened was my husband was outside and he heard this. And he ran in to see what it was, and it was Robbie seizing, and his elbow was hitting up against the wall, and he turned blue, and he was unconscious, and my husband thought he was dead. And my husband was a fireman for 13 years, and he's pulled dead bodies out of cars and train wrecks and stuff. So, he's no wimp, but when it's your own child, you freak out. And they called 911. So when we were in the hospital, we met a neurologist, and he began to ask me about Robbie's aggressive behaviors, and he was vomiting in the hospital. He was vomiting, he had diarrhea the whole day before he had the seizure, and then he was vomiting in the hospital. So he asked me about behaviors and stomach issues, and do I see them come together? I said, now that you mention that, yes, I think I do. So he said, keep a calendar. So here's what we found. Every single weekend, Robbie had diarrhea. Began at 6 p.m. every Friday, and I thought, is it because I have pizza on Fridays? Does he have some kind of, food allergy? What is it? Then the vomiting seemed to come every 6 weeks, and I would call the pediatrician's office and say, Robbie is vomiting, not just once or twice, it's every 15 minutes all night long until there's nothing left. It's projectile vomit across the room until there's nothing left in his system but green stomach bile coming out. Then that's when it finally would stop. It almost seemed like food poisoning. It was so violent. And of course, he doesn't know how to get to the bathroom when he throws up. So when he does, I have to sit next to him with a pail, and I have to catch it, and and I have to be up all night with him pretty much when this happens. So when I kept a calendar, he threw up on Thanksgiving Day, Christmas Day, February break off of school, Easter, and then Easter ended up with another seizure and another ride to the hospital, Memorial Day weekend, first day after school, after the last day of school in June, and that's when it hit me. It took me 6 months, but I put 2 and 2 together, and I realized it's every time he was off of school. He knew, somehow he knew when it was Friday, and it would upset his stomach and he would get diarrhea. If he knew it was a holiday, he knew he was not going to be going back to school for a whole week. And that made him upset to the point where he would go in his room, he'd cover up under his blanket, he'd get lethargic, he would get quiet all day until about 6 p.m. and then it would start, the vomiting. So the history of what's happened is every time he's had a seizure, he's been off of school, but there's also been diarrhea or vomiting first before it happened. So after that, anytime he would start making noises in his room where it sounded like he was going to start throwing up, you'd hear the, ugh. All of a sudden, oh no, Robbie's going to throw up. Grab the pail, run in his room, go in there, and I would, sit there and wait for him to throw up and try to catch it. But beyond that, we were all terrified that he was going to have a grand mal seizure and end up going to the hospital. Now, my poor son, my youngest son, was here the first time it happened. He saw his father freaking out. He saw the ambulance come, the police, everybody in the house taking his brother away in an ambulance, and he was scared to death. As soon as he heard that noise of Robbie, his stomach would start because his nerves would start and he would get upset. So we had to set up an action plan for him. So our next door neighbors, we were very good friends with, their younger brother lived with them who had special needs and who also had seizures. So as soon as Robbie would start, we would send David next door to go stay with the neighbors, and they would say, don't worry about it, Esteban has seizures also, everything will be fine. So that became the game plan. And as far as holidays go, we downplayed them. I stopped having anybody over to my house. I didn't decorate very much. Now you'll notice that I only have this little tabletop tree because I wasn't going to do the big tree and the whole big blown out thing, and we really just downplayed it as much as possible. The one Easter, I decided we were just going to go out to a restaurant and eat because he enjoyed going out to eat, but we never made it because he ended up throwing up and having a seizure and ended up in the hospital. So that's what holidays have been like in my house. Now, this is actually how Robbie ended up in a group home in the first place, because when I realized after the third seizure and sitting there looking at him in the hospital, laying there upset, miserable, leads hooked up to him, he's trying to pull the leads off, he's rolling over, he just wants to go to sleep, he wants to get out of there, he just wants to go home. And I sat there after the third time and I looked at him and I said, he doesn't want to be home. He doesn't want to live here. He wants to be at school all the time. He wants to be in that environment where he's happy, where he's comfortable with his peers. He was 18 at the time, and I realized even though mentally he's only 1, biologically he's 18, and his hormones and everything are saying, I'm 18 years old, and I'm ready to go out in my own world. If he was going to a regular school at 18, he'd be graduating high school and he'd be going off to college. My son David is at that point now. He's a senior. He's never home. He's always off with his friends. I'm constantly texting him, where are you? Where are you? I'm at this one's house. I'm out to eat. He's always going and doing things. He's always with his friends. And he's ready to move out and move on in his life. He's looking at colleges now. He's thinking about where he wants to go away to school. And I realized that on the inside of Robbie, he's probably feeling that same thing. I don't want to be with my mommy all the time. I want to be with my peers. I want to be at my own school. I want to have my own life now. So I thought, well, if he loves his school that much, it would be nice if he could live at his school all day. So I tried to look for a residential school for him to go and live at. That was when the economy tanked, and a couple of years ago, there was nobody that was going to pay for that. So we realized that the closest thing that we were going to get to that environment would be for him to live in a group home. So I started that process of trying to get him in a group home, and it took 2 years to get him in, but we finally got him in. I'll talk about that process in another episode. But he was, so we got him in, and I've had him in there for 3 years, but I've had issues with them. That particular organization, I just feel, is very sloppy, very unorganized. He was still going to school the first year that he was there, and he would miss school for whatever reason, I don't know, because they decided they were going to take him somewhere else, and they never called the school to tell them that he wasn't coming in that day. They would send in lunches that he didn't eat because they never kept menus, and overnight staff would come in and to sub, and they'd say, oh, well, I didn't know he didn't eat that. And well, if there was somebody, running the place that kept records and communicated and kept menus and things, that's the way it's supposed to be done, but they weren't doing it. They weren't running the place the way the state has mandated it's supposed to be run. So, they would send him wearing, long pants in the summer and shorts in the winter, and just really just stupid things. The last straw for me, though, was that they weren't bringing him to his doctor's appointments, and that's very important. He had an appointment last month to go to the neurologist, the seizure doctor, and the particular staff called out sick, so he just didn't go, because the AD, who is in charge of running the house, had no idea what was going on. And he just left it up to the random staff to do these things. So if staff called out, it just didn't get done. And there was nobody really in charge. So I took him to a doctor's appointment by myself, to his regular doctor, and that doctor sat down and said, well, I see here that Robbie has a heart murmur, and he never went to the cardiologist. And I was like, first of all, nobody told me, and second of all, they should have done that, he didn't go get his allergy shots, and he wasn't, he didn't have certain prescriptions renewed. Now, luckily, I have people to check up on them. See, his teacher used to tell me what was going on. Now, in his day program, I stay in touch with them, and they'll tell me, listen, Robbie's prescription wasn't renewed. I need to have permission for this and that. His group home didn't get this done, and he's not allowed to come to his day program until this is done. And so then poor Robbie has to sit home bored out of his mind for an entire week because he's not allowed to go to his day program because they dropped the ball and they didn't get him to his appointments. So that kind of stuff was the final straw for me. That's when I said, that's it, we're done with you, I've got to get you out. So I got him into this new organization that I've been waiting 5 years for them to have an opening. They finally have an opening. We bring them over here, and yes, they're very structured and organized. They keep records of everything. We've got menus. They keep a record of every piece of clothing that he owns. They're very structured. They have a nurse that's there all the time that goes through all the medical records. They will make sure that all his meds are in line. He gets to every single doctor's appointment and all those very critical, important things. The problem that we have, though, is they're not ready for autism. And the staff there is freaked out. They're used to things being really easy, and they're not prepared. And this is why I do my vlog, because I'm trying to let people know the world out there is not ready for this wave of autism that's about to be unleashed. You've got kids that are 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years old with autism. 1 in every 55 kids with autism, and 10 years from now, what's going to happen? They need to be ready. So I'm willing to have myself and my son be the pioneer in this area to make sure that the system gets ready.